All right, welcome back to the Irresistible Show. My name is Derek Morrell, and I have my friend Colton Carlson here again. He was on a while back. So I just want to give Colton a chance to introduce himself here in a second, and we're going to go over a few things. Colton, some discussions he had online, and I'm actually looking forward to this conversation. So Colton, go ahead, just give us a quick intro and who you are and what you do.
Sure. So I'm a math teacher and a philosophy teacher down in near Phoenix, Arizona. I've been doing that for almost 5 years now, and I love it. I love teaching math. I teach high school students, so they're always a blast to be around. And I really just like teaching philosophy. And I've been on the show at least once. I've been on Tyler Baelish show a couple times, and so. Yeah, it's an honor. It's a privilege. I like talking about specifically the philosophy of freedom with regards to Calvinism and just systematic theology as a whole. So it's kind of like my go-to.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I think a lot of people love this conversation. Some people don't understand it, and that's fine. But I think it really ties in so much with the different arguments, especially on some of these theology conversations. So let's do this, Colton. Let's jump on in. Why don't you just give everyone a quick context to what you're going to be talking about, and then I know we're going to share screens and stuff. So just give it context, and then we'll jump right in and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So I had a conversation with one of our theology groups, as you'll see in the screen in a little bit, and conversation with a non-Calvinist. I don't believe he's Arminian. I don't believe he's Molinist, if I remember correctly. But and he knows that we're doing the video, so I'm pretty sure he's okay if you see his name on the video. But he's non-Calvinist and he's completely against determinism. And so he did a post on our discussion forum, our theological discussion forum, basically trying to detail the solid logical implications of what determinism would be. So he painted a very gruesome picture, and he tried to do that specifically to show that Calvinists, if you're consistent, if you're committed to determinism, this is what you're doing, that God determines this. I'm not going to go into the details there because I think the original post for our purposes is irrelevant to our discussion that I'm going to show. But that was how it started. I responded kind of cheekily saying, hey, thank God compatibilism is true, right? Because even though that murderer murders that person in such an horrific, evil way, and that was somehow determined, or in a way determined, if you're a consistent Calvinist, I believe, then that murderer is still morally responsible, right? So I kind of wasn't really trying to argue for compatibilism there or determinism. I was just saying, hey, thank God compatibilism is true. And he commented, and we kind of went back and forth for the last 2 weeks here, just going back and forth between what determinism is entailed, the definition of determinism, definition of compatibilism. And then we kind of pinpointed the conversation into about 4 categories, which I'm sure we'll talk about, throughout. And I gave my initial response to some of those categories, and he just kept, giving me massive responses. So I felt like I didn't want to write out all that stuff, and because I'm about to have a kid on the way, I'm kind of busy. I'd rather just talk it out, one and done, and then go from there. And he said he was excited to watch the video. So that's kind of where we're at. It will be in the middle of the conversation. So if Derek, if you have any questions, just feel free, to kind of get a context for the audience. That's fine. But I'm going to kind of jump in the middle of the conversation and respond to 2 long posts that he gave. Okay. That's my goal. Yeah. Hopefully.
Yeah. I haven't even seen this conversation. I think this guy has me blocked on Facebook, so I can't see it. So I know the name of the person, and I got a quick 30, 60-second overview by Colton. So I'm going into this somewhat blind, and I'm happy to, I'll jump in and try to be fair with some questions if I see any. So are you ready to do the share?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's get you up here. It's yours.
All right, so you can see it?
Sure can.
Fantastic. So These will be the quotes that he quoted from me in my last previous response. And then if they don't have the backslashes there, this is what he is saying to me. So like I said, it's kind of like the middle of the conversation. And if you have any questions, Derek, then you can just ask. That's
Sure.
perfectly fine. It is a lot, so I'm hopefully not going to try to go line by line. But if there's something pressing, then I kind of want to go over it. So, and I also won't read every single thing as much as possible, but kind of try to chunk it. Okay. So this is what he said. That I said this, and he quoted it. So to give me some context of what he's responding to. So I said that you have said, Philip Jackson, that he said multiple times that determinism is a problem because it determines what we do, regardless of the mechanism, whether the determining mechanism is active, passive, negative, positive, efficient, deficient, it doesn't matter. And he's accusing me of basically begging the question here, because I told him that his basic argument is the fact that determinism is determinism and therefore it's bad. I probably should have chosen my words a little bit carefully in my previous response to him, which is fine, but this is what he says. So you have said this, and then went on to give examples, and I quoted multiple times where he basically said that the mechanism doesn't matter. If it's determinism, it's determinism. And I could scroll up and show you, but he should know, at least I'm responding to him, so he should know what I'm talking about. And that's the examples he's giving. But the problem, he says, is that there's no question begging what I said. Now, I'm going to just stop there and say that's false. There is question begging. If you say that the determinism is the problem because of the definition of determinism, because it literally is the definition literally is that person P does A and they do not have the ability to do other than A, and you say that's bad, then yes, that's begging the question, unless you give me an argument for why it's bad. Okay, so I would just flat out disagree with him here. He is question begging. Now he comes back at me and says that the question begging comes from me reducing down his argument to determinism bad because it's determinism. And he says that would be begging the question. And I personally don't see why that's the case. That's what he said. Now, not actually, he did not actually say that. So I want to give, a fair charity here. He
not
didn't
verbatim.
Yeah, not verbatim. Perfect. Yeah. But that's what he's saying. He's saying it doesn't matter the mechanism. It doesn't matter how a person is determined. It's just the case that if they are determined, that's bad, because the implications of determinism would be the gruesome implications that he painted in the LP. And I'm saying, why? And I'm waiting for an answer. And yet he keeps going back saying it doesn't matter all these conditions. I'm saying it does matter if it's active or passive. The determining mechanism could be actively gauging the agent, or it could be passively gauging. So in other words, I think that determinism doesn't need to be just a chess player actually efficiently moving each individual piece, like picking up the piece, moving it. No, I don't think determinism can be like that. And I think Frankfurt style examples, specifically blockage cases, which we'll get into in a little bit, they show that you could be determined, yet the agent could still be a source in some sense. Okay. And so I'm giving him that as a logical view where you could be determined, you could not have the ability to do otherwise, but yet it is still technically your own, right? And he's saying, no, that doesn't matter. That kind of determinism, it doesn't matter what kind of determinism it is. So that's kind of the logical overview, of the brief overview of his comment here. So he says, I haven't assumed that determinism is bad because it's bad. I've argued that and given reasons for my views why I don't think I escaped the logical implication. So I think that's false, but he says just because I do have a problem with determinism doesn't mean, and I agree with that, doesn't mean that just because he has a problem with determinism doesn't mean that he's not allowed to have a problem with it, and that's fine. But he says this, I haven't assumed determinism bad, I have argued and given reasons for my views. No, he hasn't. He just said that the mechanisms don't matter. So these mechanisms that I'm giving him, active or passive, deficient or efficient, whatever, those mechanisms do matter. There are different mechanisms that would either circumvent agency, person P's agency, or it would go through their agency. And he's saying, is it determinism? Oh, if it's determinism, it doesn't matter. That's what he's saying here. And so just because he's essentially saying that those mechanisms doesn't matter, and that's the reasons for his view, I would disagree. Every compatibilist would say that the mechanism matters. Compatibilism agrees that there are certain determinations that would exclude moral responsibility. That's why the manipulation cases exist, right? Love potions, stuff like that. Usually the non-Calvinist likes to think that, oh, irresistible grace is something like God dragging you from behind and you're kind of like dead as a fish, and saying, oh yeah, this is supposed to be loving. This is it's kind of like a caricature of Calvinism, right? Which I reject, and I'm sure you would reject too. But we would agree that those representations circumvent the agency. But in Calvinism, irresistible grace, regeneration, they go through the agency in a non-coercive, non-manipulative manner because of the determining mechanism is different than the determining mechanism that it would be, let's just say, for manipulation or coercion. Okay, even incompatibilists believe this, by the way. Kevin Tempe and Robert Kane both agree. Robert Kane, a libertarian, Kevin Tempe is an incompatibilist. They both agree that it's not necessarily the fact that you are determined or that you are determined, which is what I think, Philip Jackson is trying to say, but rather it's the case of how you are determined that matters or excludes or keeps moral responsibility. And that is the point. So just to kind of brief it off and say the how doesn't matter, I find as a compatibilist, that's question begging. You need to give a reason other than just saying it. So that's kind of this section here. He says that also I have other reasons than just the philosophical implications. I think scripture clearly, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not going to go into the scripture personally. As you know, Derek, the scripture can be bended either way. And this is why I'm a philosophical Calvinist, because I can look at the scripture and I can see how the categorical is entailed by there. But I can also see how the conditional is entailed by there. In short, the scripture is it's not a philosophical textbook, right? Mm-hmm. It's a theological textbook that we look at it systematically, biblically, topically, and we try to interpret it hermeneutically, or as best as we can hermeneutically, given the plain reading of the text.
And just to jump in real quick, you're absolutely right just on this point, because I've seen ad nauseum 30 verses they'll post and say, look, this guy had to choose and you were told to choose this and told to choose that, and therefore libertarian free will. But that works perfectly in our system too. It's
Yeah, it's almost like, to not go too much off a tangent, but it's almost like, oh, we make choices, so therefore determinism is bad. Mm-hmm. And no, it doesn't follow. If God determines for me to make a choice, then I will make a choice. So premise 2, God determines for me to make a choice. Conclusion, I make a choice. It follows, modus ponens, that I make a choice. What part of that choice needs to be interpreted categorically? And that is what they need. That's what they mean. They don't tell us. They just assume it to be in the text. So yeah, determinists make choices. Awesome. So this is the next piece that he quotes for me. It's like, I could continue. These quotes show that you're citing the definition of determinism, and then regardless of the sense of determinism utilized in any given action for an agent, you purport determinism is bad. That's kind of what I was explaining above. This is me, that he responded to me, and he's quoting what I said to him. So that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that he's just purporting that determinism is bad because it's bad, and the problem is that God determines regardless of the sense. He says that's false, and it's very disingenuous to me. Well, I'm sorry, you think it's false. I'm sorry if it seems disingenuous to him, but you don't get to boil down my view in your own words, perhaps, and that's fine, and whatever. But he could claim that you report some pretty nasty things and don't report, and this is just kind of, and I agree with him so far. It's like, sure, that's fine, and I just don't want to spend all the time. So all I'm saying is right here, he's right. You're completely right. You should explain it in your own view, but then why don't you accept the mechanisms that I'm giving you on determinism? He doesn't say. That's the problem, right? So I think Yeah, so I'm saying I think it's okay for me to say you think that determinism is bad because of the definition of determinism. Because, oh, you're determined? Oh, okay. So that's bad. That's the implication. That's horrible. That's the implication of determinism. And I'm saying no, that may be the implication of determinism, but the reason of the how you determine could rescue some sort of responsibility of the agent. So he almost like wants to say that because determinism, that God is the sufficient, not the efficient, and those are two different things, but not the originator of sin, but he is the sufficient uh, cause of sin. It wouldn't happen unless he did it, and he does it for his good purposes. That's the standard Calvinistic response. But if he's the sufficient cause of sin, he almost, I think that he's trying to say, Philip Jackson here, he's trying to say that that's bad. But why? Just because God's the sufficient cause of rape or murder or stealing or of false beliefs? Why is that awful? Why does that somehow give you a horrible view of God in your opinion? Now, he mentioned some biblical data for libertarian freedom or whatever. There's so many quotes I could go off the biblical data on how God's relationship to evil is a little bit closer than you think. I really don't need to go any further than Job. I mean, wouldn't you agree, Derek?
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah.
He literally wants to play a cosmic game. God wants to play almost a cosmic bet with Satan. And what does it do? It kills his whole family, save his wife, who basically resents him afterwards for not denying God.
Mm-hmm.
His whole family, his whole livestock is gone like that. Just because God, what, is the sufficient cause of it? It wouldn't happen unless God said it would happen. But he allowed Satan to do it. So to me, it's the allowance of Satan to do it is no moral, is not morally different or morally significant than the Calvinists saying God determined Satan to do it.
Same with Joseph, right? What you meant for evil, God meant for good.
It's evil. Very, yeah, exactly. It's kind of confusing to me that if that's what he tries to say, oh, it's just the logical implications of determinism, regardless of the mechanism. Why? Your own Bible in the Old Testament paints a pretty gruesome picture of God at parts, a very gruesome picture. So, I don't want to spend too much time on that though. But that's kind of the logical overview. He continues. Everyone makes a critique of something. They need not give a reason for every single time they mention the thing in question. I agree. That's fine. So for instance, every single time I make the statement that determinism is the issue or something like that, I don't have to give a reason. You don't, but the first time you say it, you do have to give a reason, which I don't know what the reason is, other than the fact that determinism is determinism and that it paints a gruesome picture of God. And then we're back to what I just said before. So I'm still waiting for that. So long as I give the reason in the discussion, that is sufficient for me not to be question begging. No, it needs to be sufficient for both parties, not just you. So unless I'm misunderstanding him, maybe you can speak up about this, but as you're reading it, maybe, Derek, no, it needs to be sufficient for both parties.
Well, he's just trying to give himself an out, it looks like.
Maybe. I'm not sure. I don't want to, nitpick it or anything like that, but maybe. But here, that's the main part. No, it's has to be sufficient for me too. Otherwise, it's still question begging. Okay. So, and if you look at one of the quotes that you should see the reason clearly, it doesn't matter whether you agree with the reason or not. It absolutely does. So long as I give a reason, then I'm not question begging. No, just because you give a reason doesn't mean the reason's not question begging. Stratton does that all the time. He's like, oh, I give it deductive arguments for my support of libertarianism. Yeah, guess what? Your premises depend on inductive support. And guess what that induction is? Question begging. Okay, so it doesn't matter whether or not you give reasons. The reasons still cannot be question begging. To kind of give it another way, I don't know if you're a religious epistemologist or you believe in religious epistemology. I'm not necessarily a fan of religious epistemology, but because I do believe it's question begging if you presuppose God's existence. We don't need to get into that. And I know that's kind of a in-house debate with Calvinists and non-Calvinists, but To me, that's the same thing. Just because a religious epistemologist gives a reason for why they believe, they say God. So why do you believe in God? Oh, because of God. I gave a reason, so it's not question begging? No. Your reason can still be question begging. So you need to give a reason that I agree with that doesn't presuppose your worldview, and then we can move on. Right? Okay. So I think this is what he says. The problem is that God's choosing people's choices for them in eternity past and then condemning them. So this is what I believe he says. That's why he puts it in brackets here. And so then he tries to explain, what am I saying here? Am I just saying that determinism is bad? Yeah, kind of, personally. But I'll continue. Or am I saying that that I see a problem with determinism, and the problem is the implications that follow from it, which is what I kind of alluded to above. That's what I think he's trying to get at, such as God's making people's choices for them such that they cannot choose anything other than what God fixed from them from eternity past. Yeah, why is that bad? And then he says this, a whopper. Can you believe this? I love it. He says right after that, if you don't see a problem with that, I can't help you. Okay. So, all right. Just because you say that there's a problem doesn't mean that there's actually a problem, right? Like your intuition could be wrong. You need to give a deductive reason or some sort of reason that's not question begging that I would agree with, using either my worldview or something that we agree on that shows that. And I'm saying, no, that's not wrong. That's different. Also, such as God making people's choices for them. That's not what we believe. It's not determinism. And if he says, oh, it is, then you're question begging. God doesn't make people's choices for them. And I gave a reason, which we'll get down in a little bit, that something like a blockage Frankfurt style case could be that the agent makes the choice on their own, yet they have no other alternative possibilities, no robust other alternative possibilities that are necessary for moral responsibility there, yet they couldn't do otherwise. But yet they make them on their own in the actual sequence. That's what I'm trying to show, that God is trying to determine. So God is like determining using a global Frankfurt style case. That's how we make choices on their own and how God doesn't make our choices for us. Right? And he's just saying, such as God making people's choices for them, they can't choose. God doesn't make people's choices for them. And again, I want to say to the audience, if he responds saying, well, then you don't believe in determinism, then I would say, I don't think, and I say this respectfully, that I really do say this respectfully, and I know how non-Calvinists hate this, but then you don't know what determinism is or what it could entail. I can't think of a single philosopher that would say that. And these are professionals in their field, not an incompatibilist, not a libertarian. No philosopher that I can think of would ever say that, except for maybe Tim Stratton, which I think he's wrong on multiple accounts anyways. So, and he's not even a philosopher, he's a theologian. So I'm just kind of baffled here that he would just say, oh, I can't help you. Well, sorry, bro. I don't know if you have anything to say to that, but I thought that was hilarious. But.
Well, the thing I'm picturing as I read this, and again, I haven't read this first time I'm seeing it too. It's almost like when they're writing, or him or others I see, it's like they're picturing the dominoes, right? And you're just a domino in the dominoes, and that's determinism, and there's nothing else but that. And you are one domino that plops over when it's, the chain reaction hits.
Yeah, and it's not that. I think that is an okay model for determinism, but that's not the only model at our disposal. James N. Anderson, a prominent determinist, argues for something like the authorial model. He says that we don't live in a domino simulation. We don't even live in a computer simulation. We live in a novel. God is the author of our lives in some sense, and that's following after Edwards, but not in the morally objectionable sense, right? He's not morally culpable for the actions of his characters in the novel. So in other words, Shakespeare is not morally culpable for Hamlet or Macbeth killing, right? He just writes the story. It's his story, history, right? So with that sense, using the authorial model of providence, it's not like that. So yeah, I would agree. It's, again, not this chess piece, not this flick of a domino. It's It's a different model that I'm
What would you
gauging.
say though if Philip or whoever else said, "Well, that's great, but the end result is the same"? Because I think they're looking
Sure.
at the start and the end, and they're basically, or what I'm kind of seeing here is, it doesn't matter what's in the middle. That end's going to happen, and so
Yes.
therefore, no matter how you want to, polish it up, it's still, the worst thing I can think of. So, what would you say
Yeah,
to
and
that?
I like that because he tries to show why he says that's a huge problem. It's a huge problem for the implications of determinism. If God determines the murderer to do this, or God determines the rapist, or God determines the stealer, or whatever, he thinks that there's a whole host of problems, make God look like a bubbling buffoon. So he is gauging and my personal favorite, it makes God into the worst moral monster, imaginable. Okay. He's thinking about the implications, like you said. And again, I want to kindly and respectfully point out, what about Job? Job was pretty much destroyed, except his life. He had nothing, and his friends were no help. His wife was no help. He was alone with a rock taking off boils in ashes. He lost all of his children, all of his livestock in a single day, in a matter of minutes, probably 5 minutes. And guess who is a sufficient cause of that?
God.
Yeah. Does that make God into the worst moral monster imaginable?
Well,
Well,
and
the atheist would say that, probably.
yeah, and the argument too. I mean, well, then what then is your explanation, right? Either what is this kind of dualistic role with Satan, and
Mhm.
God said, do what you want, just don't kill him, and then it was just all Satan's
Yeah.
working, and I mean, there's not much of a counter to that.
He tries to say that it robs people of their God-given freedom to make their own choices apart from anything else beyond themselves. First of all, why does that matter? Because if you say that freedom is an intrinsic good, again, I can think of no philosopher, not even a libertarian, that can say that freedom is intrinsically good. It's always good because it gives you something else, namely greater goods, like love, for instance. A lot of libertarians would like to say that, right? That love entails libertarian freedom because libertarian freedom is necessary for love. That's the greater good. The end result is love, and freedom just gets you to that end result. And that's fine. I think that's false. I think that premise is false. I don't think love requires libertarian freedom because one doesn't need to look more further than God's own Trinitarian love. He can't not love them within the Trinity, but yet he still is perfectly free, we would say. But regardless of that, this seems to be what I highlighted here. He's trying to say that freedom is intrinsic. So the response to Job is like, well, he just has the intrinsic freedom, to bless God in that scenario, whatever. Yeah, and I would say, is it intrinsic or is it instrumental? Because God would get glory from his freedom. So if we're looking at the different kinds of goods that God could establish here, personally, and this is kind of a little bit off topic, but personally, I think a God that doesn't risk any evil via freedom of his creatures, indeterministic freedom of his creatures, is a more powerful, more wise, and more loving God. Because then I know when the evil does happen, like Job, it is for a perfectly good, redeemable reason.
Mm-hmm.
I can take that to the bank. It's not because, God's like, oh crap, I didn't see that. And even the open theist can't escape this charge because God clearly knew that he gave Satan permission. But still, it's the reason why God does certain things. And I don't think that the freedom here is an intrinsic good. So maybe that's not what he's saying. Maybe not. But either way, I could just say, why does that matter? Why does this matter? You have yet to show that. He continues, you even seem to agree with me at certain points when using the type of language, saying that the purpose of making their own choice. Yeah, because I'm using a Frankfurt style example. Okay, so I'm using a Frankfurt style example, which means that the agent doesn't have the alternative possibilities condition, whatever. So I agree, making their own choice, but do they have the ability to do otherwise? No. So making their own choice, and their choice comes from them because it comes from the inner, he's quoting me, inner converging telos. God works through your agency rather than against it. And I agree. He says, while ignoring the plain fact of the matter, God determined those things too, which you still have yet to respond. No. God can determine in different mechanisms, different ways. He can determine passively or efficiently. He can determine around certain things, yet ensuring the actual outcome of that thing, which we call that determinism, or he actually just makes it happen. So what I say is God can efficiently make righteousness happen within the life of a believer, because righteousness is a good thing. I believe he is the source of righteousness, right? You would agree, Calvinists agree, everyone agrees. God is the source of righteousness. In our sanctification process, I really do want God to make me more righteous. That's part of my prayers, like every day. Make me more righteous, make me more like Christ. Literally change me, sanctify me, right? He has the power to efficiently cause me or change me to become more righteous in that sense. But is that the only mechanism of determinism here? No, he can also deficiently cause me or deficiently determine me to do, let's just say, sin. For let's just say that, which let's just say I'm really awful to my wife, God forbid, but I yell at her, or I make fun of her in an awful way. That would be a deficient determining mechanism. Now, God still ensures that it would happen for his good purposes, just like Job or Joseph, like you said. However, he is intending it for good while I intend it for evil. Okay, and guess what does that? Guess what gives us a framework for that? The Frankfurt style case, which we're going to get into a little bit. Okay, so no, I'm not ignoring it by any means. He says he gives a logical explanation for varying senses of determinism. That's what I gave. That's what he's quoting me. And you respond many times that they essentially don't matter. So I'm questioning that. So I tell him I fail to see the disingenuity here. So he tries to respond. He says, first, give a logical case. Giving me a logical case is only enough to prove that your idea is logically consistent one. It's true. So if a Frankfurt style case is, or let's just say a specific Frankfurt style case, a blockage Frankfurt style case is good enough, then it's logically consistent. But he says that's no part of his argument. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. But rather my argument is that it's morally inconsistent for the reasons I mentioned. Well, given my mechanisms that he has yet to actually interact with, rather than just dismissing them, it's perfectly fine. Sin is a privation, right? So sin is not really a thing. It's more like, it's not a positive substance. It's more like a negative substance. So the most real thing is God, and if he's perfectly good and perfectly righteous, that means righteousness is the light, and sin is kind of the absence of that. Okay, I'm not going to get into my whole reasons for why that's the case. I call it transworld deprivation personally, that God makes morally contingent creatures, that we will always be a little less than God, which allows room for sin to happen. But something along those lines, that's what I would say. He says my argument is that's morally inconsistent for the reasons I mentioned above. And I just don't see that. No, if there's a deficient determining mechanism from God that he can determine something deficiently, namely the negative substance of sin, through still a decree, then he can be said, A, to be the sufficient cause of it, B, not the efficient cause of it, and then C, if those two things are correct, then that rescues God's moral inconsistency, in my estimation. Okay, and he has yet to interact with any of that. So I don't really care personally, and again, respectfully, I don't really care what. I know his argument is that's morally consistent, that's the implications, but so what? He has yet to interact with my mechanisms that I posited that the compatibilists should be, that they should hold. So what's the problem?
Mm-hmm.
Second, imagine that I gave a logically coherent way of explaining something, that rape is permissible. I never said rape is permissible or even possible, even a good thing. And I never said it was a good thing. Give all these fancy philosophical ideas about passive and active consent, and I give a decent case for why rape is good. Never said it was good. Now, suppose that we have a conversation about it, at which I would rant and rave and saying I've given a logically, am I wrong with it? That's the problem. You are question begging Philip Jackson on that part. you are thinking that I am thinking that because determinism is true, rape is therefore permissible, which is question begging. Just because rape is determined underneath the Calvinistic system does not mean that God is actually morally permitting it. In other words, that he's actually okay morally with it. No. This is exactly what Calvinists have been saying all for centuries. There's a decretive and prescriptive will, regardless of whether or not you agree with those wills. Is not really the conversation in here, but I'm just giving you another way of logical, coherent explanation of getting around this kind of straw man here. I never said that rape was permissible. Rape is awful, prescriptively. God does not decree it. It goes against the marriage bed. He's disgusted with it. But does he still decree it or determine it? Calvinists would say, consistent determinist Calvinists would say, yes, not prescriptively, but decretively, and for his good purposes. Why would he sell Joseph's brother? Or not Joseph's brother, but his brothers allow Joseph to be sold into slavery. He intends it for good. They intend it for evil. So there's that different wills there, that God is working in the background regardless of what we do to redeem his people, right? So to say that I maybe implicitly say that rape is permissible, that's not what I'm saying. And if any Calvinist does say that, then they're not a Calvinist. I wouldn't even say that they're possibly Christian. That's damnable. You should never say rape or something like that is okay. And I'm never saying that. I haven't even said that. I hope I explained that well.
No, you sure did. And just a quick question. Why do you think these guys hate categories? Because like you're saying, it's, there's categories of decree, there's categories of this. And it's not that it's not the Calvinist is trying to make up stuff. It's you're trying to be technically accurate with all the different variations out there. Right. So do you find that perhaps he's really not seeing what you're saying because he can't grasp that there's categories, or you think it's just something that they deny?
I just think that's a great question. I think it's really that they don't see the need for the categories, so they kind of see them as irrelevant. Okay. Right? And because they say like the only reason why you have these categories is because your system entails it. And I would respond saying yes and no. I think having two wills is perfectly understandable given our own conditions. Like I want to wake up in the morning, but then again, I don't want to wake up in the morning. Is that a contradiction? Am I schizophrenic? Right? Do I have dual personalities? Am I divided against myself? No. There's one sense in which I want to wake up in the morning so I can get up, shower, go to work, get paid, right? Provide for my family. And there's another sense in which I don't want to wake up in the morning because I'm tired. I'm sleepy. I just woke up from a REM cycle. I want to get a few extra minutes in, right? Or maybe I stayed up so late at night and then I haven't had enough sleep. Yes? So there's different senses here. So to me, I think yes or no, our systematic does entail it in some regard, the Calvinistic systematic specifically. But in another sense, I believe their own systematic must hold to it too.
Exactly.
And so I know they like to say, non-Calvinists like to say, mainly Arminians, antecedent and consequent wills. Okay, so you have an antecedent, a sufficient will, and then you have a consequent will, which is a necessary will. And I would say the same thing with the decretive and prescriptive, that one entails the other. Namely, the prescriptive is a subset of the decretive will. So in other words, based off logic, your decretive will entails your prescriptive will. So if you have a decretive will, and if God's the one controlling the decretive will, then there must be a prescriptive will because it's God, he's morally righteous, and all theists agree with that, right? So I don't need to defend that, but there's still this sufficient will and necessary will, right? Just like what the non-Calvinist says. So they believe in a necessary and sufficient will. We believe in a necessary and sufficient will. What's the problem?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, not to harp on it, but you could say, God said, love your neighbors, yet he annihilated nations in the Old Testament. Like, you have to, okay, well, here's this category and this, just everyone
Yeah,
does
and
it.
then the atheist comes in and says like, oh, you're not being consistent, and they are kind of stuck at the wall trying to give a theodicy or defense for why God would do that. And I'm saying, great, let's all gang up together, us theists, Calvinists and non-Calvinists alike, and attack the atheists that way. Stop attacking the Calvinists for something that you already have to use.
What's that word you taught me the last time we were on?
My wife calls them ecclesiodices because it's ecclesia for the church, and then theodicies for a justification for why God would do this evil thing. And so she's like, are they doing an ecclesiodicy again? I'm like, yes, honey, they are. They're attacking me for something that they would already implicitly use towards the atheist. So it's really bizarre here. It's really bizarre. And I don't get it, but we can continue if you want.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
He just continues with this whole logical, absurd scenario where I apparently or implicitly said that rape is permissible because it's determined. No, just because it's determined doesn't mean it's permissible, at least not in the prescriptive sense. It is permissible in the decretive sense, but what's morally permissible is the prescriptive sense, and that's not permissible, so therefore there's no logical inconsistency here. So he continues, why don't you just accept it? It's concerning me that you won't be able enough to just accept what I'm saying about rape. I don't accept it. You know why? Surprise. It's a straw man. That's why. It's not actually representing the view. I'm being cheeky here. He's my friend on Facebook. I'm sure he'll probably laugh at Scold and that, or maybe get really upset about it. I mean it with all respect, brother, if he's listening to this, or if he will listen to it. But yeah, it's a straw man, so that's why I don't accept it. Why would I accept something that I think is a straw man? That's bizarre. Then you tell me that all the problems wrong with rape and what it does to people and the like, which is true. It destroys people's lives, to which I say that you are question begging. Don't see how that follows. Don't see how that follows. Why am I question begging? I'm not even the one with the OP. He was the one with the OP. I just commented cheekily, and then he started engaging me. Right? So I really don't see how I'm question begging here. I'm giving logical, consistent answers of how to go around, even though the implications that he painted in the OP are roughly what they are, what he says that they are, doesn't mean that A, God is morally objectionable, and that he's morally culpable for, and B, that we're excused. We have the moral responsibility, even though everything that he said in the OP is correct, and then God is not morally responsible for it in the ways that I described above, the determining mechanisms, the deficient, efficient distinctions, the prescriptive and decretive distinctions. These are distinctions that the Reformed have made, and he's just not engaging with them. So I don't know. He's saying, that's how I'm seeing this conversation, whether right or wrong. Unfortunately, that's not how it goes, but he's free to disagree, pun intended, to go that route if he wants to.
A for effort, right?
Yeah, so this is the last comment he said here, and I think it's just about as long, so we'll try to briefly go through it. But he quotes me, this is me, now getting into the Frankfurt-style blockage cases. So I say, first you realize blockage Frankfurt-style cases, FSCs, that's what they're called, that's what they're abbreviated in the literature. Blockage Frankfurt-style cases are developed and defended by incompatibilists, right? Stump, Zagzebski, Hunt would all affirm something like these cases. Same with Parabum. Okay, now
and before you jump in, give us
I was going to do that
because I'm sure people are going to be wondering what that is.
Absolutely. So I want to say, first of all, this book right here, hopefully you can see it. Maybe it's kind of backwards, but it says Moral Responsibility and Alternative Possibilities, Essay in the Importance of Alternative Possibilities, edited by Whitaker, who's a libertarian, or at least an incompatibilist, and McKenna, who's a compatibilist. It is chock full of just everything, basically the best literature, best philosophical literature from the best professional philosophers on Frankfurt-style cases alone. So the whole book is on Frankfurt-style cases, differing Frankfurt-style cases, all that fun jazz. One of the most sophisticated Frankfurt-style cases ever developed started with Alfred Mealy and David Robb. And I believe, it's kind of hard to tell from what I've read from them, but I believe they're compatibilists. And they give a very sophisticated example of a blockage-Frankfurt style case. Now, from their example, it has generated a lot of discussion. It was in the late 90s. And so incompatibilists like Stump and Zagzebski, who we call libertarian Frankfurt style case philosophers, or Frankfurt libertarians, they've even developed, they've taken the same kind of idea and then put it in their own philosophy, where you can be a libertarian without having the ability to do otherwise. And I'll get to that in a little bit. David Hunt is another incompatibilist who's a believer. I believe all of them are believers, Stump, Zagzebski, and Hunt, who are all incompatibilists, who don't affirm determinism, who don't affirm Calvinism, and they would all argue something similar to these kinds of cases. So what is the blockage Frankfurt style case? I'll try to summarize it as best I possibly can. Actually, you know what? Before that, I'm gonna give a general overview of what a Frankfurt style case is.
And yeah, like, does the name? Where does Frankfurt come from? Is it the city? Is it a guy's name? Is it all that good stuff?
Yeah. So Harry Frankfurt is where it comes from. Harry Frankfurt is a philosopher. I believe he works in Harvard, Princeton. I believe it's Harvard though. And he developed in 1969 a 10-page essay trying to give a counterexample to PAP. PAP is the principle of alternative possibilities. So what he's trying to give a counterexample to the PAP is that the PAP is not necessary for moral responsibility. So in other words, you can be morally responsible without having the ability to do otherwise. Okay, and if you're morally responsible without having the ability to do otherwise, that seems to significantly undercut the incompatibilist claim, where the incompatibilist would say, no, determinism and compatibilism are not compatible, or they are incompatible, because determinism rules out the agent's ability to do otherwise. So if these cases work, then what it really does is try to actually show an argument or maybe a defense of compatibilism. It kind of leans on the compatibilistic side, where this is a logically possible scenario, regardless of whether or not this scenario actually exists. It's a logically possible counterexample to the fact that an agent could not have the ability to do otherwise, yet they are morally responsible. So I always give this example. It's my favorite example of a Frankfurt style case, right? So let's imagine I'm in my bedroom and I ask my wife to get me a Coke, right? Instead of a nasty LaCroix, because I don't like LaCroix. They're really gross. It's just carbonated water. I like my Coke Zero. It's good stuff. She goes to the fridge, and unbeknownst to her, last night I put in a little microchip in her brain to kind of analyze her decision-making processes. So if she were to go to get me a LaCroix in the fridge, instead of what I want, a Coke, I would switch her brain mechanisms, and it would kind of like zap her into deciding to get the Coke for me instead. That's what we call the alternative sequence. Now, I don't want that to happen. I'd rather my wife, Diana, to give me a Coke on her own accord without me zapping her, right? So I just kind of stay stagnant the whole time. I just kind of monitor what is she going to do? And as it actually turns out, she decides to give me the Coke instead. She doesn't even really deliberate about giving me a LaCroix, because she loves me and I love her, and she's a great wife. So she did me a great act of service, and I kiss her. She gives me the Coke. So thankful. But did I intervene at all? No, I was just a mere counterfactual person off on the side, unbeknownst to her. And I was just kind of analyzing the 30,000 foot up. I was kind of analyzing what she would do. She chose the Coke on her own. I did not get involved, but here's the question. Did she have the ability to do otherwise? Did she have the ability to actually choose a LaCroix over a Coke, or vice versa? Or let's just say not choose any drink at all. Did she have the ability to do that? That's the most basic Frankfurt style case that Frankfurt originally argued for in 1969. Now it really boomed. Like he writes the foreword, Frankfurt writes the foreword, Harry Frankfurt, in this book. And he's just honored that literally since then, over the last 50 years, the philosophy of freedom have just boomed. It's almost like a Gettier case, if you're familiar with Gettier cases with epistemology. That's kind of technical, so I won't get into it, but we're talking about metaphysics, right? And really just so many philosophers like, wow, this is such an interesting case. Let me try to make it work here, 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 here. And so that's the basic idea of a Frankfurt-style case. And some philosophers have defended, their own libertarianism against Frankfurt-style cases, like Robert Kane doesn't believe Frankfurt-style cases are that they work, that they're actually sound. Robert Kane, he's a libertarian. Kevin Tempe thinks that they're sound in some areas, which we'll get into a little bit. And then other philosophers like Van Inwagen, he doesn't believe that Frankfurt-style cases work. And they give their own response to them over the decades, right? But I think a failure to understand what the Frankfurt-style case is when you talk about the philosophy of freedom or Calvinism, or specifically compatibilistic Calvinism, you're really missing the mark here. You need to know what they really are. So I hope that's a good general overview before I get into the blockage case.
No, it is. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so the blockage case. Mealy and Robb, Alfred Mealy and David Robb in the late 90s, I think 99 or 98, posited this case. I'm not going to read it. It's very technical, but I'll try to explain it to the best of my ability. A blockage Frankfurt-style case pushes, again, the counterfactual intervener, let's just say like my wife, to use the same example. I'm the counterfactual intervener and my wife is the agent. So it pushes that kind of mechanisms into her brain. So I'm analyzing the brain. I put, again, the same thing as before. I put the chip in her brain, unbeknownst to her. And as she's about to give me a LaCroix, it's what they call it indeterministic. So I block off all other neuro nodes. So it's very technical. In your brain, you have neuro nodes popping up, like neurotransmitters, that if I popped up this transmitter, my wife would choose LaCroix. If I popped up that transmitter, she would choose Coke, right? So there's differing neurotransmitters that would pop up on my screen, my counterfactual, nefarious screen, I guess, to see what she's actually doing.
Right.
And so that's pretty much all the same, except for it gets really technical with the brain. And so really what I do is I neuralize, or I kind of, I don't know if it's the right word, but castrate. I kind of don't really get rid of, I just kind of shut down the neuro nodes that do lead to other alternatives. So let's just say she had the alternative to pick orange juice, LaCroix, to not choose anything at all, to say, no, honey, get it yourself, back off. Or maybe to just choose milk instead of all those options that she would, indeterministically have. She still has them. It's just the case that, unbeknownst to her, I neuralize those options. I don't circumvent her agency, but she's still her agent, and I don't necessarily I don't block off her own deliberative processes. But because I'm so sophisticated and because I'm so, let's just say, omniscient, which I try to put towards God, I know that this node, this neurotransmitter goes to this one, this neurotransmitter goes to this one. And because I don't want her to do any of those alternatives, I block them all off, unbeknownst to her. So that means the only path really that she has is what I want, the Coke, right? So it guarantees, that kind of process guarantees that she chooses the Coke. But as it actually happens, even though all the nodes are kind of blocked off, all the other alternative possibilities are kind of blocked off, as it actually happens, she chooses the Coke. And I don't necessarily need to intervene at all, okay? She still has the indeterministic freedom to choose LaCroix, or the indeterministic freedom to choose milk or orange juice, or not choose anything at all, but I neuralize those. So as it actually happens, she just kind of goes through it. Another way to kind of look at it is similar to a hallway with closed doors. And so after this, I hope it would make more sense to the listeners. So you're in a hallway with closed doors, right? You don't know which door is necessarily open until you try it, right? So basically, you're just walking down the hall. I want her to open the door at the very end of the hall, right? And so as it actually happens, even though all the other doors are locked, there are still doors to her. And as far as she knows, she could actualize going into the door, right? As far as she knows, she could go into the door if she wanted to. But as it actually happens, because am analyzing her on my little iPad or whatever, I'm seeing that she's not really making any inclination whatsoever to go towards those doors. So I don't need to intervene at all. She walks down the hallway, she opens the door that's been unlocked all this time, and that's exactly the door I want her to go into. Okay? And guess what? She does it under her own accord. So it's a little bit more sophisticated than the regular Frankfurt style case, and I probably butchered it in some ways. I would highly recommend Philip Jackson or any other, maybe you, Derek, to get something like this. I believe this one was actually pretty cheap. I think this was only like $40, maybe $30 on Amazon. Yeah. But it's very, very technical. Like I've had this for probably 6 months. I'm only like halfway through. So it's very, very technical, and it's for professional philosophers.
And that other book you told me about was the compatibilist. They were analyzing Fisher and someone else.
Oh yeah, Dr. Michael Preciado.
Yeah,
he tries to show that Frankfurt style cases are compatible with, or guidance control is compatible with Reformed theology. Excellent book. But yeah, that one was about $30 some. That one is Michael Preciado, and it's called A Reformed View of Freedom, the compatibility between guidance control and Reformed theology. So he uses a lot of Frankfurt style cases too, and he goes through the literature and so forth. So with all that said, this is what I've said on the screen. First, you realize blockage Frankfurt style cases developed. I say that they are developed by incompatibilists. They are what we call Frankfurt libertarians. I disagree with them on a number of occasions, but we won't get into that. He says, Colton, well, thank you for using my first name. Very respectable. I think you might have been misunderstanding me because my issue is not with blockage Frankfurt style cases. Oh, that's amazing. Okay, so I'm really interested. You don't have any issue with them. So I think that people in those cases very well might have freedom, even in the libertarian sense. No. So he says, I'm not one of those libertarians who doesn't think PAP is necessary. Then you're not a libertarian. I'm sorry. You're just not a libertarian. You cannot be a libertarian unless you believe PAP, the principle of alternative possibilities. Now he's going to hear this and he's going to be like, what? Like, and I mean that again respectfully. Like he's gonna fight it, right? All libertarians usually do. Derek. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. They try. So the sourcehood is what matters, right? Sourcehood is what matters. And he tries to smuggle in the libertarian sense. Stratton does the exact same thing, and it's cringy. So he says, you could say I believe in the type of limited libertarian freedom that Braxton Hunter, I think he's talking about Braxton Hunter, so long as the agent is not causally determined by anything beyond itself. Here's why I love these Frankfurt style examples. And this is not something I told him. Personally, Frankfurt style examples are meant to be a counterexample towards PAP. They are meant to necessarily almost be an argument for compatibilism, right? So like you don't have the ability to do otherwise, but yet you're still morally responsible. And that's compatible with determinism, which means it's compatibilism. Here's the rub. Personally, I don't think we should use Frankfurt as compatibilists. I don't think we should use Frankfurt style arguments as an argument. We should not use Frankfurt style cases as arguments for compatibilism. And here's why. Because the agent will always still be able to have the alternative possibility of maybe possibly preventing to go to a different door, or possibly trying to choose the orange juice or the LaCroix instead of the Coke. And that's what we call the flicker of freedom. They have maybe a small flicker that as soon as I see her kind of gauging for the LaCroix, I turn her neurotransmitters off or whatever, and then I switched to the Coke. But here's the problem. She had that small little alternative possibility of choosing to do otherwise. So for me, and even as a compatibilist, I would say I do not use Frankfurt style examples as an argument. So maybe you're wondering, like, so why are you bringing it up? Because you can show PAP, alternative possibilities, to be false on independent grounds other than Frankfurt style examples. And I would just posit Bignon's book here. Bignon shows at least 3 arguments for why PAP is false. If you show on independent, perhaps Christian Calvinistic grounds that PAP is false, then you can go back and say, okay, how is it logically possible that God could ensure an outcome though they could not do otherwise? The only Frankfurt style case that I can think of that completely gets rid of all alternative possibilities while still having the agent technically choose what the counterfactual intervener wants them to choose, and they do it on their own, the agent does it on their own, is the blockage Frankfurt style cases. But here's the problem. Even libertarians like Robert Kane and even incompatibilists like Kevin Tempe say that that is a complete deterministic case. That blockage Frankfurt style examples are a complete deterministic case, that the agent truly could not do otherwise, but yet they did it on their own. But that's just straight determinism. So what they say, Tempe, even Hunt, who is a fan of blockage cases, David Hunt, they all agree. Kane, Tempe, Hunt, they would all say, yeah, that's true. It seems kind of deterministic. And if that's the case, it's question begging against the PAP. But what if you show PAP to be false on independent grounds? Is it therefore question begging against the PAP? No. In fact, if you use a Frankfurt style case not as an argument, but as a logical possibility, namely a defense of compatibilism here, or defense of determinism, then I don't see how you could be question begging here. So I'm not using them as an argument. I'm using them as a logical possibility. And I hope that makes sense. But here, I think Jackson wants to try to say that, hey, I'm totally cool with Frankfurt style cases. Yeah, it does show that the agent could not do otherwise. And I'm saying, no, they don't. The only case that shows that the agent could not do otherwise, but yet possibly does it on their own, is the blockage Frankfurt style case. And that would be question begging against the PAP. So if you're going to affirm this, Philip Jackson, you'd be, to me, logically incoherent. I hope that makes sense. I know this is very technical, I know, but I really hope it makes sense because it's so important to get at.
I'm sorry, what was the name of the Bignon book?
Bignon, great. So Guillaume Bignon is a French Calvinistic analytical philosopher. He came out with a book in 2017, 18, and it's called Excusing Sinners, Blaming God. Very cheeky title. Excusing Sinners, Blaming God, a Calvinistic assessment on determinism, moral responsibility, and God's involvement in evil. That's what it's called.
Cool.
So, yeah, great. And so he may still say, yeah, but you can be libertarian in the source sense. Nope. Another incompatibilist, Kevin Tempe, and even your own best philosopher on libertarianism, Robert Kane, probably arguably, I would say the best libertarian philosopher is Robert Kane. They both agree that you always have to have an alternative possibility in order to be libertarian. You all, in some way, shape, or form, at some time in your life. So if he's trying to show global Frankfurt style case here, which I think that's what he's trying to show, then no, that doesn't work. You're not libertarian. At best, you're source incompatibilist. That's all. That's it. At best, you can be a source incompatibilist. You cannot be a libertarian and be that. Kane argues extensively that no, you still have to have some alternative possibility in order to form your own actions. The reason why you can consider yourself the source, or in other words, not causally determined by anything beyond itself, the only reason why you could think that and know that is if you had at one point alternative possibilities that were robust enough for moral responsibility. Okay, you need to have that at least at one time in your life, but that makes you hold to the necessity of the path, right? Because you need that in order to be the source, in order to be realized the source. So if you get rid of PAP completely and just say PAP is sufficient and not necessary for libertarian freedom, but sourcehood is necessary for libertarian freedom, you're being inconsistent. I say the exact same thing to Tim Stratton, and I would say the exact same thing to Braxton Hunter here. Okay, they're not professionals in the I don't want to do appeal to authority here, but it's true. They're not professionals in the metaphysics of freedom. Kevin Tempe, Robert Kane, Dirk Pereboom are professionals in the metaphysics of freedom. They literally have PhDs on free will. They all agree, and they all come from different free will camps, that that's not logically coherent. So no, you cannot. You cannot do that. So this whole section here, I would just chalk it up to incoherent. He says, even if it could not have done otherwise, it would be free in the libertarian sense. Nope. At best, you would be the source incompatibilist. But even then, given a blockage Frankfurt style example, I wouldn't even say that you're the original source of that action. Personally, I would say that there's other sufficient conditions, namely me blocking off your neurotransmitters so that you would choose the action that I want you to choose, even though it's on your own. You're the one who formed it. At best, you're a formal determiner or a formal agent cause or a formal sourcehood agent. You are not what I would consider the original, ultimate, efficient sourcehood determiner. And this is where we get into sourcehood compatibilism, which
so let me ask a question here.
Yeah, go for it.
How would that translate into the term libertarian free will? Was that the libertarian? I mean, because are you using it in a different way, or so? If you're saying that, Philip here, if you're correct in the assessment that he's not a libertarian, then does that therefore mean that he would not believe in libertarian free will, or is libertarian free will more of a generalized concept of freedom?
I would say he's not logically consistent in holding the libertarian free will title if he negates alternative possibilities. And so I would say he can believe in some sense of freedom that libertarianism holds, namely the sourcehood condition, the ultimate sourcehood condition. But then that would classify him as what we call a source incompatibilist in the free will literature. So he'd be with the likes of Kevin Tempe. Kevin Tempe believes he's not a compatibilist. Kevin Tempe is a source incompatibilist, that what's most important is being the efficient causal source of your actions, right? Even though you may have some sort of residual alternative possibility sometime in your life, that's not what's really important. What's really important to assess responsibility is the sourcehood. And I think that's what Jackson here is saying. But if that's the case, he's not a libertarian. If that's the case, he should forsake the title and just become a source incompatibilist like Kevin Tempe. That would be logically consistent. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. It does, for sure.
Okay. So yeah, that's what I want to say. And I know he's probably going to get maybe upset about that. Jackson will. And I'm sorry, but that's what the literature says. Unless you can show me otherwise in the literature, that's what the the professional philosophers logically hold to, then I'm going to.
And it's good to be technical here, because these are, if you're going to dive into the deep end and even entertain anything like this, I mean, people have to be, at least try to be consistent with what they're believing in here, or else
Yeah, exactly. And I want him to be consistent, but I'm telling him that he's not consistent. And then he says something like this, when they're actually on my side. Nope. Show me one philosopher on your side that would agree that a blockage Frankfurt style case is not a deterministic case. Even the one who tries to, Mealy and Robb would probably say that's not a deterministic case because they're the original kind of founders of the blockage case, but they're compatibilists. So, are you a compatibilist, Jackson? That would be a happy day. That would be a happy day. No, but all incompatibilists on your side agree that it's a deterministic case, that the agent could not do otherwise, yet it could be on their own. And that's what I'm saying that God does to all his creation. We're in a global Frankfurt style blockage case Because in that case, you see differing mechanisms. You see an efficient determining mechanism in the alternative sequence. You see a deficient mechanism in the actual sequence. And so I'm saying that that allows for the different determining mechanisms to allow the agent's determining mechanism and the counterfactual intervener's determining mechanism. But then that means that's compatibilism. Because underneath incompatibilism, you don't have any other determining mechanism other than you, right? That's literally incompatibilism. So no, I'm sorry, you're wrong. They're on mine. They're on mine. All of us agree that blockage finger style are possible. Great, they're possible. That's all I'm saying. And we accept that person can have libertarian freedom. No, 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 no. I do not. No, 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 no. The only ones that would agree to that are Frankfurt libertarians like Zagzebski and Stump. And even then, Kevin Tempe has shown in his second book on free will, it's called just straight up free will. That's what it's called. It's called Free Will, Sourcehood, and Its Alternatives. And it's the second edition. He actually revised his first edition to include this, that even those like Stump and Zagzebski and everyone who try to be Frankfurt libertarians, it ultimately doesn't work out. You know why? Because it still involves an alternative possibility. It still involves, if you want to claim some sort of sourcehood, which that's what Jackson wants, that involves some sort of alternative possibilities. So no, you don't get around it by positing something like a Frankfurt libertarian. It's just incoherent. And Kevin Tempe, who's not even on my side, who's an incompatibilist, would argue that. So no, but we deny that that people would be free and thus morally responsible under that scenario if on top of what you add is determinism. That's just, again, logically incoherent. Tempe, Kane, and even Hunt, who really likes blockage Frankfurt style cases, they're all libertarians or incompatibilists. They would all concede that it's a deterministic case. You're wrong. Okay, they all concede it's a deterministic case. It is determinism, but yet possibly, they would even grant that possibly underneath a blockage case, the agent could do what they do on their own. And that's what I want to say, right? So again, logically incoherent. So you are accusing me of disagreeing with Frankfurt, but that's not the case. Well, you kind of do disagree with Frankfurt style cases because I've shown that it's not consistent. I hope that's fair, but I think they are a valid possibility. Great, and maybe even reality. Amazing, thank you. But Frankfurt style don't get you determinism. False. They do. They do, and I just showed a case. Blockage Frankfurt style cases, it gives you determinism. And I've quoted people who are not compatibilists who say that. So I don't see the problem here. I haven't even question begged anywhere, right? You can have a blockage Frankfurt style cases where the person is blocked from voting for candidate B, true, but freely choose to vote for candidate A, yes. Going down that hallway door, the example that I use, all other doors are blocked, okay? But I want them to go down that door and they do it on their own free will, which is what he was going to choose from the get-go. Great, nothing beyond himself caused him to choose A, even though he was blocked. Yeah, nothing beyond himself causally determined him circumventing his agency to do A, but that doesn't mean that the whole case itself was determined. Because again, there's differing determining mechanisms that I try to show you at the beginning, but yet Jackson just completely got rid of them, saying it doesn't matter because the logical implications are the same. It doesn't matter if the logical implications are the same. That's not what I'm getting at. Even if the logical implications are the same, who cares? God is still not blamed, and we're still not excused because of something like this, the case right here. I hope that summarizes the Frankfurt style case as well.
No, it's good, man.
That was a section on. I know it's really technical. I'm sorry, anyone who's listening and they're like, "This sucks." It's helpful for the Calvinists, and I hope there's good interaction for it. So I'm sorry to be technical, but it is what it is. I teach AP calculus. You need to be technical at times, or else they're not going to pass the AP test. So just saying. I say this. He quotes me. Fantastic. Person's inner converging telos is determined efficiently regarding sin, which is what I would say. So that rescues God being the author of sin in the objectionable sense. and efficiently regarding righteousness. I think God does cause us to do righteousness. It is in him who lives and moves and has, in him we live and move and have our being, right? He causes us to do righteous things. That's why we pray to him, make us righteous. Otherwise, it's a logically incoherent statement to ask God, make me righteous, when you can't do anything, right? So we want him to efficiently give us righteousness, to make us more like Christ every day. But he can still determine the outcome either efficiently or deficiently. Two different determining mechanisms: prescriptive will, decretive will, all that fun jazz, and yet still determine the outcome. Bignon actually calls them, as a side note, he does something similar. He calls them the active-passive pair, active-passive counterfactual pair. So the passive would be deficiently regarding sin. God kind of passes over. He doesn't shine his grace in your life in a certain percentage or a certain way so that you would naturally do a certain sinful action. But if he shines enough grace in your life, you would not do the sinful action. You would do instead efficiently righteous action. So it's similar to that. Other theologians have done this active-passive pair or deficient efficiently. So I'm kind of just borrowing from them. But you say simply, I haven't gotten out of the problem. So I'm saying that he's saying that I haven't gotten out of the problem. And he says this, I don't know how many times I have to explain it. Sorry to burst your bubble. Explain it to me one more time. If having your action determined by something beyond yourself, God, nullifies your freedom, that's a big if. Wouldn't you say, Derek?
Oh yeah, big if.
Big if that you have yet to prove, but okay. Which any system of determinism does. No, I was so close to granting, but then you just ruined it right here. Which any system of determinism does. Question begging, why? I said why. You say this. You just question begging. Then he says distinguishing between deficient and efficient causation does not help you. Does nothing, since God is still choosing what the person will choose instead of letting them make their own choice. But didn't you just concede, Jackson, that Frankfurt-style case is they're conceding their own choice? You did. Up here. You did. Nothing. Yeah, you already conceded. Freely chose to vote for candidate. Oh my gosh. So if you did concede that, then why are you saying this? What? I'm very confused. Why? So no. So number one, that's a big if. Prove that, please. It is his OP, by the way. Number two, question begging. And then number three, you've already conceded this, though. So, and I've shown that other philosophers, professional philosophers, much smarter than both of us, have agreed that a Blockage-Frankfurt-style case is basically determinism. They just don't like to use them because then they say, oh, if you're using it as an argument, it's question begging against the path because it is determinism. And I would say to those philosophers, yes, you're right. But what if we don't use them as an argument? What if we use Blockage-Frankfurt-style cases as a defense for why God or how God could determine something and prove independently that pap is false, like with Bignon's arguments? Then there's no question begging there. That's how I use them. But he's not using them that way. So when you get down to this highlighted part, it makes no sense to me. It makes no sense. Like, what are you trying to say? You've just conceded that the person makes their choice on their own. And then you're like, oh, it doesn't matter because of this big fat smuggled in if, and also this question begging right here, this question begging premise, which any system, nope. Not even incompatibilists believe this. Kane, a libertarian, does believe that there could be different determining mechanisms. There's absolute determinism, which is kind of like hard determinism. There's hypothetical determinism. There's a determinism where it circumvents your agency and manipulates you. There's a determinism that goes through your agency. God can determine us positively or negatively, depending on if it's sin or righteousness. It's just not been shown, so it's really bizarre here. Whatever system you construct to get out of the problem cannot still contain the problem of God determining the person's choice. Why not? Or else that the person is just not free and responsible. Why not? Why? I wonder. Because of your question-begging libertarianism? Maybe. Even though it's an incoherent form of libertarianism, if you don't believe that the alternative possibilities is necessary in the first place. And likewise, God would be responsible. Nope, that has not been shown. Sorry, yeah, you have not shown that. And no, it's not because determinism is determinism because it's bad. That's what it seems like to me. But okay, that's what it seems like to me. I don't want to be trite, but whatever. And that's a lame reduction, perhaps. So maybe I'll concede that. I'll concede that determinism is determinism because it's the bad part, but still haven't shown anything. So no. I say, yeah, because it's determinism, that's question begging. And I'm still saying that because it is. And I have given a logically acceptable way. I'm saying this. He's quoting me. Logically acceptable way. And I'm saying that Frankfurt-style cases in the actual sequence are blockage cases, yet still ensure that the agent cannot do otherwise. That's true. I've already explained this. Blockage cases. He's like, again, no, it's almost laughable at this point. Well, I'm glad I'm funny. My wife says I'm not funny sometimes, so I'm glad I made someone laugh. Right? You keep digging in those heels, and I don't wear heels. I thought I know so awful at humor.
That's a great dad joke, man. I love it.
I know I'm a dad soon, so I have to be kind of dad joke.
Corny dad jokes.
But and remember, he says, giving a logically acceptable way way that God could determine people's choices doesn't mean that's true, for one. And that's true. You're right. But then again, I don't have the OP. So I'm just giving a logically acceptable way out of the argument because it's not my burden to prove the implications of determinism is exactly what he shows. Even if those were the case, I am still morally responsible if God determined, and those awful, gruesome consequences, implications that he tries to paint in the OP, even if that was the case, I'm still morally responsible underneath compatibilism. God is still determining me to do what I do, and he's still not morally culpable. Based off the authorial model of providence, blockage Frankfurt-style cases, which he has already conceded, and differing determining mechanisms. So I haven't really question begged at all, and I've given a logical, acceptable way that God can determine people's choices. But he's right. It doesn't mean that's actually true. Sure, that's fine. But then again, I'm not arguing for it, so it doesn't matter. And then for 2, he says, it doesn't explain how a morally perfect being could do this and remain just. Sure it does. Sure it does. Think about Job. Think about the authorial model of providence. Shakespeare doesn't make Macbeth go on a killing rampage, now does he? No, he deficiently determines that Macbeth does what he does. But as James and Anderson would say, he sufficiently determines Macbeth's deficient cause of killing that person, this person, whatever. Now, would we hold Shakespeare morally responsible for Macbeth's kills? Absolutely not. In fact, you know what we would say, Derek? Masterpiece. And we would say it's a master. This whole story explains so well the human condition and what true love is and blah, blah, blah. And we look at it and we study it and we think about it. Kind of like, the Bible, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's a great thing. And just from a more of a general comment, yeah, it's very much like the Bible. But I think part of the problem guys like Philip here have is they isolate one situation and they kind of put it in a vacuum and say that this is so evil and so bad, there's no way God can be somewhat involved with it, right? So you take Joseph, you put that one event, there's nothing that happened after the event. I mean, because it's just like in a vacuum, and then it's like, okay, well, that is pretty bad. But that's not the full story. That's not the full picture of it.
Yeah, I believe Tyler Vela also says that, and all Calvinists, I think, would agree that God determined Christ to die on the cross. He crushed his own innocent, holy, righteous son. And I think Leighton Flowers came back and said, well, God can ordain events, but that doesn't mean he has ordained people. And then Tyler came back and said, that doesn't even make sense. How do you ordain events but not determine the indeterminate agents that could do otherwise?
Right.
there would be a possibility that Christ would not die on the cross. Right? He would need to know and determine it perfectly. All of the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin, Pontius Pilate, everything. Pontius Pilate was actually deliberating there for a second. If it was indeterministic deliberation, he could have just said, no, he doesn't get crucified, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it seems very just bizarre to say something like that. And so, yeah, I would agree. God determined the most gruesome act, deficiently, to be sure, deficiently, but he is still the sufficient cause of that crucifixion. And we would all say, praise the Lord, praise God, because without it, and for his own morally sufficient reasons, we would not have salvation. So,
And it wasn't plan B. I got to put that in there. It wasn't plan
yeah,
B.
exactly. It wasn't infralapsarianism. Yeah. So it was not plan B. Oh my gosh. I remember actually in college when I heard a preacher say that one time, like the crucifixion was actually plan B. He really wanted, Adam and Eve to, to live in communion with God or whatever. And yeah, he wanted it prescriptively, but decretively not, because redemption needs to be accomplished. And Adam and Eve were not perfect in the garden. They were good, but that doesn't mean they were incorruptible. The fall needed to happen so that we could be made incorruptible, so that we could have the freedom like God, not being able to sin. And we can live in perfect, harmonious righteousness with him without even the hint of any evil creeping in. That's what makes the gospel beautiful, right? And so that's why Christ needed to die as plan A. Now, that's obviously a tangent.
Sure.
I'm sure Jackson probably disagrees, but whatever, to each his own. But yeah, he says you may think he could do this and remain just, but that would be a fundamental disagreement. Yes, it is. And since he hasn't proven it, I'm just going to dismiss it. Quotes me, the mechanism of the agent is formally determined by the agent. I would say that we are still agents. We are still determiners. We are still a source in some sense. We're not the efficient originator of that source, but we still do it on our own. I quote some source compatibilists like Dana Nelkin and Carolina Sotario, awesome books. Dana Nelkin's book is called, I think, Freedom and Moral Responsibility. It's like 114 pages long or something like that. It's like $10. It's like $15 on Amazon. Super small. Amazing. Carolina Sotario, same thing, about $10. It's about the same size. Amazing book. Actually, Carolina Sotario is going to write, co-author a book with Robert Kane coming out in September. And they're kind of going back and forth in the book. I can't wait for it. It's amazing. Because Kane is like freaking old. He's like 80 years old. I'm surprised he's still writing things. That guy, he's kicking it. But it is not the case that God inclined the man's heart to will to sin. That's what I say. It is the agent who inclined his will to sin, yet within a Frankfurt style case, like a blockage case, so that it was the agent's will. He was not the efficient cause of the will. He was a formal cause of the will. So I'm kind of just giving a general overview. In the blockage case, let's just say, man is about to sin instead of just, choosing a Coke or LaCroix or something, but he's actually sinning, like about to rape or kill or steal or not love his wife or whatever, steal on his taxes, I don't know, not show up to work, whatever the sin is, it doesn't matter. I'm trying to give a logical case of how that could work. He says, I have the same problem here and I've had elsewhere. The mechanism you speak of, is it determined by God in any sense? Nope. Because guess what? Blockage case, Frankfurt style example, it assumes indeterminism. Great, no problem here. So not in any sense. But although there is a determining mechanism waiting counterfactually on the sidelines to overwrite the indeterministic process that the agent is utilizing here. So, but that's the counterfactual. Kane has some problems with that, Robert Kane, but we won't get into that. I would imagine that you would say yes. So no, actually, you imagine wrong. I said no, it's not determined efficiently by God. But hey, it is deficiently determined by God. And so there is different determining mechanisms that God can still ensure something even in the indeterministic mechanism, which is why something like simple foreknowledge views just blow up to determinism. Why Molinism, I think, blows up to determinism. You just can't get around it. It's God's foreknowledge is incompatible with freedom. the kind of freedom they want to say.
Right.
So he says, you keep trying to address determinism, dress it up. Okay, well, that's cute. With these distinctions and ways of talking, but you have yet to actually explain how people would be free and responsible while God, I have yet to be able to explain it in a way that is suitable to you, because he's question begging some sort of libertarian freedom or sourcehoodness. And even if he says, oh, I don't believe in alternative possibilities, well, then you believe in efficient sourcehood. Why is that necessary for responsibility? Why can't a case like this, where the agent is actually not the sufficient cause of doing, action A, or walking down the hall and choosing that action, why is that the case? Why are they the efficient cause here when they're not even the sufficient cause? I'm using a lot of vocabulary here, but it doesn't make sense. If you're not the sufficient cause, you're not the efficient cause. And the sufficient cause in a blockage Frankfurt style case is not the agent, it is the counterfactual intervener, God. But yet they're not held responsible because the agent does what they do on their own, formally. So he says, you have yet to explain how people would be free and responsible while God is determining 100% of their actions. I think I have, with blockage Frankfurt style cases. God is ensuring the outcome through that case 100%. They could not do otherwise, completely neuralizing all the other transmitters that go to action A, B, C, not A, not B, not C, whatever, until they actually do the action I want them to do, D. And God is determining it either negatively or positively, deficiently or efficiently. And similarly, how God would not be responsible for the actions. I already said the authorial model of providence, or the passive active decree. That's how. And if you still want to say God is still responsible for that action, okay, well, God is the sufficient cause of Job's suffering. So is he responsible for it? If you say no, well, then there you go. So you are just, he says, you seem to be asserting the blockage to give a logically coherent case on how, perhaps. But then again, it's not my OP. So that God can determine something, but you haven't shown is how God is a perfect being, morally able to determine a creature's action without removing their freedom in the process. Sure, I have. Blockage Frankfurt style cases. The counterfactual intervener did not remove his indeterministic process. His indeterministic process still remains intact. His indeterministic deliberative process still remains intact in that case. It renders the action inevitable, but I would agree with Mealy and Rob, the ones who championed the case, it's not necessarily deterministic. And even if it was deterministic, it wouldn't be a problem because there's different mechanisms of determinism. So he says how God, as a perfect moral being, be able to determine creatures' actions without removing freedom or responsibility in the process. Even if he holds to Frankfurt style cases, like a blockage case, maybe he's like a simple foreknowledge guy, right? Perhaps. Then why doesn't God intervene? When the agent does what they want to do. And if you're like, well, he doesn't need to intervene when the agent does what they want to do, especially if the action is sin or rape. Maybe they don't intervene because God sees their freedom as just. They don't want to circumvent their freedom. He wants them to make their own choice. And then I would say, precisely, he wants them to make their own choice. That's why he's morally able. Okay? He said to me, even to yourself, that you agree with my assessment of the implications of determinism? Yeah, perhaps, but you still need compatibilism in there. If you do not think your case convinces you that it would work without God being guilty for it. Yeah, because God's not guilty for it. It's not. If I give a case, like a Frankfurt style example or blockage Frankfurt style example, and you even agree with the blockage Frankfurt style example, then I think implicitly you're agreeing that this is a logically possible scenario and God is not responsible for it. Unless you would say, go back on what you originally said, and the counterfactual intervener is still responsible for neuralizing the neurotransmitters in the agent's brain. And if they are responsible for that, well, then you would be discounting what you said previously. And then you would have to hold to libertarianism entailing the alternative possibilities condition. Okay, but that's a whole nother conversation. So until I see that you make those strides, then yeah, I think this convinces me. It's a logically possible scenario. So, and God is not morally responsible for it. Just like the counterfactual intervener is not morally responsible for, let's just say, neuralizing the nodes in the Frankfurt-style case. Okay. This main paragraph, he pretty much takes a lot of pains trying to explain what I just explained. So he's like, why would you go so far and try so hard to make philosophy fit instead of accepting those intuitions? There's no intuitions to accept, my brother. To me, my intuitions say that God is morally responsible for being the sufficient cause of Job's suffering. If I followed my intuitions, then I wouldn't be here. Okay. Like personally, intuitions can be wrong. That's the point of philosophy. You need to question your intuitions, right? If I came across a passage that said God raped a boy, never said God raped a boy. And that's different, by the way, because this would be God raping a boy efficiently. He is the actual action for it. He's actually doing it. And we all know, and most philosophers agree, that causal responsibility is not the same thing as moral responsibility. And intentions are not closed underneath the causal responsibility, even if one entailed the other. Okay, but this, I wouldn't reject this statement because of that. I would reject this because God would literally be sinning, and that's awful. He doesn't sin. I'm pretty sure I would search for the passage that I was trying to get dogmatically, blah, blah. Yeah, you're right, sure. Guess what? That's not my position, so I can skip ahead. It's not what it means. And even if you did say it is what it means, think about this. Didn't God command Abraham to kill his own son? And then be like, well, he had morally sufficient reasons for doing that. Exactly. Exactly. Right? He has the intentions, morally sufficient intentions that are not found underneath that entailment, that the story does not give us. But we know, because God is God, that he has morally sufficient reasons for that. Try explaining that to an atheist. It's really difficult. Okay, but it has to be done, and this to me is an ecclesiodicy. So yeah, I would agree. Instead of finding a million ways that it would be okay with God to rape a little boy, I don't need to, because it's wrong, and that's not what determinism entails anyway, so that's question begging. Why not just realize that no matter the caveat, God cannot do that? I do. Great, we're in agreement. And would never want to do that in the first place. Yep, God would never want to rape a little boy. You know why? Because God is all powerful, and he's all righteous, and he's all loving. Praise God.
Here's my issue. Here's my issue.
No.
Yeah. Here's my issue with the guys that argue this stuff, and I see it all the time. Mm-hmm. Okay, so say they're right. Well, then you have the boy getting raped, right, by someone. You still have an omnipresent God in the same room, essentially, that's not stopping it. Because now if everything's responsible for man, then now you're left with a God who is watching these atrocities happen that isn't stopping it. So if we're going to always apply our own personal moral compasses on these issues, if you or I were in a room and there was someone trying to rape someone, we would stop it, but yet they have to assume that God doesn't stop it, and then they'll have to assume that there's some better reason not to do it. So
yeah, I agree.
It's almost like they're skipping the ball down the field a little bit further, but they didn't solve anything, essentially.
Yeah, and I think that's true. And Beyond, most Calvinists actually make this statement. Beyond makes the same statement in his second part of his book. Paul Helm makes it a lot. There's no moral significant difference between God allowing and God determining an action, when in both cases God is powerful enough to stop it.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be another reason why God allows it, why God determines this action. Okay, and I am assuming determining mechanisms here, the varying determining mechanisms, or why God would allow it just because of their indeterministic freedom, right? So there's a reason why that's the case, and there's an intention that we are not aware of,
Right.
i.e. decretive will, that we are not aware of, that why God does what he does, right?
And we know that up
So,
front. Yeah. So
yes.
we're dealing
Yeah.
with it up front, not, when God must have a good reason for that, but that's horrible. The tsunami killed 200,000 people in Indonesia. He could have stopped it, but
Oh, yeah.
you have all these scenarios.
And I think, what did I also say? Because they say that because it allows love. I think libertarians, like I'm thinking about Tim Stratton, he says that he allows those things because of love, not, and love leads to libertarian freedom, like real libertarian freedom. And I'm just saying, like, why? I don't understand. Like, love, like people coming to him in a maximally way, because I guess he could have used his middle knowledge and everything, but Jackson here I don't think is a Molinist, so he doesn't even have that option. But it seems very clear to me that God allows natural evil for a different, even if they do want to say love, he allows it for a different state of affairs, a greater good. That's exactly what.
Well, and didn't William Lane Craig say something like if God wanted to make free creatures, it was impossible to have a universe or a world where they wouldn't sin, or he said something to that effect. Yeah. Because when you get the Strattons and, you take that argument out to heaven, right? So that means God must love you, so you have the free will to sin in heaven. And if you do, something happens. I don't know. It's not a consistent argument.
So William Lane Craig follows after Plantinga there, and it's called transworld depravity. That it's not logically possible for God to make, free creature, or a world full of free creatures, and have them not sin. So it's called transworld depravity. But it gets really interesting because, to find that optimal number of how many would come to him, right? Because that's what love is all about for them, is that, for as many saved, it's kind of a numbers game. For Calvinists, we say it's God's glory, right? But they say it's more like a numbers game. Like, you need the maximum number of people to come to him, because that's what it's all about, right? Being reconciled to Christ. And I would say, yeah, it is, but for God's glory. Regardless of that, they even posit something like called transworld damnation or transworld salvation. Like, some will always, no matter what the feasible world is, some will always not choose Christ, or some will always choose Christ. And so God puts those people in his calculations. And, that's not what Jackson's talking about here. And it's a very interesting conversation. I disagree with it personally in different methods, but you're right about the heaven thing. And Tyler Valen and I just critiqued Tim Stratton, one of Tim Stratton's articles. And it was similar to that, with this idea of heaven and everything. So, but kind of along the same lines, because Tim Stratton also talked about this. He says, that's what I think God feels about determining people's actions for them. What? God, because God determined the boy to be raped, that means God's raping the boy? No, unless I'm misunderstanding him. Maybe he gives us the ability to make our free choices instead of making our decisions for us. Okay, well, that's great. And so I agree with that. And the blockage Frankfurt style case allows for this, like a programmer does with his robot toys. That's question begging. They're not synonymous. Give me an argument for why they're synonymous, and then maybe I'll believe you. Last thing, I know it's been a while, but I say this. I've explained all this, but it's sort of concerning. It's sort of concerning because something like blockage finger style cases utilized by incompatibilists, and I just adopt them, does not mean that they are rendered null because of my determinism. So, yeah, just because I posit determinism doesn't mean it renders them null. In fact, incompatibilists say it is a deterministic case. So that's exciting. Incompatibilists say that it's a deterministic case. He says, I never said that they weren't utilized by incompatibilists. Great. But they are, which means I have no reason to lie to you. I have no reason to smuggle in my own presuppositions, right? That's what it means. And I stated above that I actually agree that Frankfurt-style cases are a valid possibility. Fantastic. To me, in light of that, personally, I think he conceded the whole argument. I really do. I think he conceded the whole thing, given what the professional philosophers have said about the blockage Schrinkford style case. Yeah, to me, it's just conceded my whole point. If you want to use an FSC, go ahead. Great, I will. If you want to smuggle in determinism, then I'm going to address determinism. Fantastic. I'm not smuggling it in. In fact, it is a deterministic case. And your own incompatibilist philosophers agree that it's determinism. So I'm just showing you that there is a logical possible scenario in which God could determine an agent with varying mechanisms while still holding the agent to do and make the choice on their own. That rescues God from being morally responsible, and it rescues the agent from being excused. So he says, I don't really see what work the Schrinkford styles are doing for you. I just explained it at all in this case against my position. I just explained it. And hopefully, maybe I enlightened him somehow. Hopefully I
to enlighten him. Yeah.
So this is what the whole video was about. That's the whole thing. The rest is good. So
I see that tag there. When you tagged me, I was like, I don't see it, man. And then I was like, oh, that guy, he blocked me.
So yeah, that's the whole thing. Those were the two posts. That's all I wanted to share. And I hope I enlightened Jackson personally. I know he's excited to read this. He's probably going to give me a massive response. I won't be responding to it. I told him that this would be my final response. But if he gives a video or if he sends me something or whatever, then I'll read it and go from there.
So what are you hoping this accomplishes? Are you hoping it kind of puts to rest, like, or at least he sees your position from a better perspective? Because sometimes, in messages and text and all that, sometimes we miss stuff, right? So hopefully he was able to hear you explain it.
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of people they always usually ask me, like, why do you take the debate of Calvinism this way? Usually Calvinists are more theological, more biblical, systematic, or historical. Why do you take it the philosophical way? Like, they're weird. Usually these people, the non-Calvinists, tell me, oh, you're kind of weird, right? Like, you're a Calvinist and a philosopher. It's because I think it's where the debate lies. Okay, it's where the debate lies. Like, I think you could personally, I don't know about you, I can see the biblical data go both ways personally. Not really the systematic data per se, but the biblical data I can see go kind of both ways. And then the grammatical data, the grammatical hermeneutical data, the exegesis, I can honestly see both ways. I think both of them are very powerful. So that's why I bring the debate in with the philosophy, because if you take libertarianism away, you really don't have open theism. You really don't have simple foreknowledge or something along those lines. Like classical Arminianism, you don't have. You don't have Molinism, as that's one of the pillars. You basically take away all the other providential systems and you're left with the only one that's compatible with, namely Calvinism. And so I think the debate lies philosophically. I hope that, this is out of brotherly love. I hope that someone watches this and Philip watches this and knows that I respect him a lot. He's a great thinker. I love the guy. I'm a friend with him on Facebook. And I know I've spoken with him personally, like outside of like on messaging and everything. And we have cordial conversations. So I know he'll appreciate this. And I hope he does appreciate it. I want the non-Calvinists to see that there's philosophical, robust answers. It's not just gobbledygook. It's not just philosophical, like word salads. These are professional answers. I'm reading a professional philosophy textbook, so I can defend what I believe to be the most biblical systematic, and I can defend it accurately and robustly. And if you're not about that life, then respectfully to my non-Calvinist brothers, you're not playing the same game. You need to play the game of the philosophy. If you critique philosophically, I will critique you philosophically back. So,
not to put you on the spot here, but in the event that Philip wanted to jump on here, not to debate, but just to have a discussion, would you be open for that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, we can,
yeah, I love the guy. Philip's a great brother. He does a lot of when I see his posts, he's so good at logic. He's really good at logic. He's good at his premises. He makes really good original posts, and he's just really cordial with a lot of different believers and Calvinists alike. And I respect him. I really do. I want to say that very clearly. So absolutely, I would love to, if he wanted to.
Yeah.
If he wanted to come on, I would love to have a conversation with him.
Yeah. So Philip, if you're watching this, I mean, just reach out to Colton, and if you want to jump on here, and it's not a debate, just you guys can go back and forth a little bit and kind of tie the loose ends as you guys see fit. So was there, as we tie this up, it's been about just under 2 hours, anything else you wanted to say here?
No, just praise God that Calvinism is true. And that he's not morally objectionable in any sense, and that he doesn't risk evil in his providence. And one of the reasons why I love Calvinism, and I know it's kind of weird on the internet, a lot of people are like, oh, Calvinism is this awful thing. We see it all the times in our discussion forums, but I love Calvinism. I really do. It gives me a sense of assurance, hope, confidence, boldness, even. And I'm sure that you can attest to that as well with some of your run-ins and debates.
God's actually God, right?
Yeah. He is completely sovereign. And no, that doesn't mean automatically determinism, right? Sovereign doesn't automatically mean determinism, but he's sovereign in the way that I believe to be not only the most biblical, but also the most philosophical, robust way. The one that makes the most sense. We have a perfectly good God, but yet he doesn't want to risk evil. That's not what God does. He wants to control it in such a way as to ensure glory, ensure redemption come out of that.
Yeah.
And I think the only way to do that is through determinism. And so, that's what I want to end with. If you're not a Calvinist, you can find me on Facebook and Irresistible Truth discussion page. I'll be on there. Derek and I hopefully will try to convince you, because it is an amazing, systematic and philosophical piece of work. So,
yep, very, very important stuff. And what's cool is how we believe, if Calvinism is true, which we believe it is, it should be able to withstand all different pieces. It should be able to withstand philosophy and, of course, scripture. Scripture is primary, but all these things. So yeah, totally agree with Colton. And hey, man, it was good having you on the show again. This is number 2 so far.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. It's
absolutely. We'll do it again. And Philip, you got an open invitation. And for everyone else watching, we do thank you for hanging out with us. And until next time, have a good day.